To the Mallard Report. I'm your host, Jim Mallard. Before the Fast Hour and Paranormal Talk Radio starts, please go over to facebook.com/italkparanormal and give it a like. And leave a message telling me what show you're listening to. I enjoy the fan feedback.
The opinions expressed on the Mallard Report are those of the host and participants and are not intended to and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any simulcasting radio network or sponsor. All listeners are advised to make their own decisions.
It's the Mallard Report. Yeah, the Mallard Report, the paranormal talk radio show with Jim Mallard as your host. See what lies beneath any paranormal activity. Go inside a world that others don't want to see. It's the Mallard Report. Yeah, the Mallard Report.
And welcome to tonight's Mallard Report. I have Micah-Hanks online already. Online. That's pretty good. I'm getting better at that. So we were just chatting a little bit before we came on here. So I was asking him if he's ready to be thrown under the bus, like I did his. Well, what's your relationship like with Scotty Roberts? Business partner? What should I call that?
We're just friends, actually. Oh man! By the way, Jim, thanks for having me on the program. It's great to finally grace the hallowed halls of the Mallard Report. But that said, yeah, Scotty and I we met. Gosh, a couple of years ago, he was doing a program on the Patriot Brigade Talk Radio Network. At the time, it was called Dead Reckoning. And at that time, I had been doing the very first incarnation of what is known today as the Micah-Hanks program. I broadcast on the Global Radio Alliance Sunday nights at 8 p.m. And I was actually doing that show that long ago, and there was a brief hiatus, which Gralien Report, of course, filled for the next 2.5, 3 years. And, of course, now I'm back on the airwaves again with the Micah-Hanks program and Gralien Report. So Scotty and I started working together around that time. And he launched Intrepid Magazine and initially had me just writing some articles along with Nick Redfern, Marie D. Jones, some of the original staff writers. Before long, he ended up reaching out to me and saying, hey, we should do some sort of event. Now, this story, to make a long one, a really long one short, I used to joke around with my buddies in the community and say, we need to do a end of the world party in 2012. I mean, if there's really any chance that the world's going to end, we need to do an end of the world party that's going to be the likes of which none have seen. I said we should rent a great big building somewhere in the Midwest in a major metropolitan area, not New York, because New York, we all know the aliens will land there first. But let's go someplace in the Midwest, Chicago, Minneapolis, someplace like that. Let's rent a great big building. Let's get a bunch of speakers to come and give presentations, and then, of course, leading up to midnight, it's just going to be a great big party. And we'll do that on December 21st. It'll be cold, but, hey, we'll bear it. Long story short, we had joked about that Gralien Report End of the World party for a long time, and Scotty was very serious about wanting to do an event, and what grew out of that was what's called the Paradigm Symposium, and one thing led to another, and so I've been helping Scotty with his Paradigm Symposium, for probably, this is going on our second year. I've been, an editor at his Intrepid magazine. And notice I say his on all those things. Sure, yeah, I'm working absolutely to the bone on all these kinds of endeavors with him. But, I have to give Scotty the credit. He's really the guy that got the ball rolling. He's the guy that puts out the magazine. He's really kind of the man with the plan. So that's where my working with Scotty came together. But then, of course, there's the Gralien aspect of all that, which is just so bizarre we really couldn't even get into it, despite the fact that we're talking about me and not Scotty. I'm not even going to talk about Gralien today, Jim, so sorry.
That's fine. No, well, okay. Let's toss it back. First off, I wanted to mention we were just talking about the mouth of the South, and we'll get to that in a minute. But you sounded like a NASCAR driver there, because I'm pretty sure you checked everything off your list that I needed to get worked in, and we're 4 minutes in. Good job.
Just watch, because I'm going to be right back over there with the pit crew here in about 5 minutes, okay? And I'll have you down there with me. Talk about thrown under a bus. Have you been thrown under a race car before?
No, I haven't.
It's going to be bad.
I was just waiting for the '87 Chevrolet today. That's all it was lacking for that conversation. Now, okay, so what's
NASCAR driver is actually a nice. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
No, I was going to ask, what's the difference between the Gralien Report and the Micah-Hanks program, for those who aren't versed in it?
Well, my evil twin hosts the Gralien Report. He's been doing that for me for a long time. The Micah-Hanks program is actually me, and that's what people really need to understand, the fundamental difference there. But aside from that, the Gralien Report, is something that I've been doing the website Gralien Report for about 5 years. We're going on 6 years this coming January. And although, I've been doing it for an awful long time, that site focuses mostly on unexplained phenomena. Now, you got to keep in mind, I'm not the kind of guy who, when you talk about UFOs, I'm not going to say, was this a spaceship seen over Adelaide, Australia, or something like that. I'm going to tell you, no, we see an object. I love Jacques Vallée's definition of what a UFO is as being a incredible amount of energy in a very confined space, which implicates a lot of different things, a lot of different possibilities. A lot of people have allegedly incurred radiation burns, which seems to indicate the presence of non-ionizing radiation or extreme amounts of heat. And so one theory about some of the UFO craft that have been seen over the years is that some of them may utilize some kind of a nuclear propulsion system. Now, we don't know of any aircraft exotic enough to account for a lot of the famous UFO reports, the likes of maybe the Cash Landrum incident that occurred in Texas in 1980 and others. But the thing is that I don't think it's beyond the realm of the possible that we're dealing with a lot of Earth-based technologies. But really, in terms of trying to deal with it scientifically, we can speculate to ourselves, but we can't really come to a conclusive determination about what a UFO is without the hard proof to back that up. And so for me, sure, we could look at extraterrestrial intervention here on planet Earth as a possibility, but I'm not willing at this point to jump to that conclusion. And so I've, over the years, become, again, what I call, and I proudly stand behind this, I've become more skeptical. But a skeptic doesn't have to enter the discussion with a predisposition toward disbelief and an intention on debunking. You know, there's an article I've got linked up at micah-hanks.com right now that talks about giant skeletons. And there are a lot of skeptics out there that will tell you straight up that, well, first of all, there's no evidence of a cover-up with the Smithsonian. And second of all, a 6.5-foot tall skeleton found anywhere in the United States, even if this was a person, an individual that may have existed close to 1,000 years ago in Earth's or in American prehistory, pre-Columbian America. That's not really giant. Quite the contrary, though. What's interesting is that there are instances where the Smithsonian had allegedly involved themselves in the recovery of these kinds of skeletons. In some instances, they were not taken back to the Smithsonian because large skeletons that were actually discovered and that were mentioned specifically in reports like the 12th Annual Bureau of Ethnology report to the Secretary of the Smithsonian, published in 1894, these kinds of things literally look at instances where there were incredibly large skeletons found, but that they were in such a state of decomposition, at the time that they were discovered, they could be measured, but they couldn't be removed from the burial site, often found in mounds and things like that. The actual bone fragments would crumble when they tried to be removed. So maybe the reason that there's not a cover-up is because in a lot of instances the Smithsonian didn't actually retrieve the skeletons. They were certainly found and they were actually mentioned in the reports. Now, what's funny is that seems so far outside the frame of reference for most people in terms of their history and their interpretation of modern science, that they don't want to have to account for those kinds of things. And so I see that what believers do is they try and build this kind of a story about these fantastic fairyland creatures that existed in prehistory. Maybe they were just humans. The skeptics, on the other hand, try and dumb it down, and they try and cram it into their own ideological format, I guess. And so what I see is that both sides tend to take their preconceptions about something and try and make what they perceive in reality as something that conforms to what they want reality to be. I've tried to get away from that, and so I'm a skeptic in that sense. With the Gralien report, I can do that, but I have to do that usually within the context of what that site and that program deals with, which is the strange and the unusual, my true passion. But I'm interested in a lot of things, as we'll probably see over the course of this discussion. And so, in addition to helping Scotty plan Paradigm Symposium and do Intrepid Magazine, which all that really has more to do with ancient mysteries and things, the likes of the giant skeleton conspiracies and all this sort of stuff with the Smithsonian. With the Micah Hanks program, you'll hear me talking about political conspiracies, current events and things like that, as well as talking with people who take a very unconventional approach to the study of the unexplained. You're not going to hear me interviewing people who claim that, aliens abduct them every night. And if you do, I'm going to be looking at that outside the context of UFO abduction. Maybe abduction exists, but can we really say that UFOs are behind that? So that's kind of the difference between the programs. I think with the Micah Hanks show, I'm able to look at a lot of the different things that are going on in the world around me, not just the paranormal, but I do have a very logical, serious, and yes, skeptical approach that I like to apply to the paranormal when I discuss that.
So we're kind of on the same wavelength, if I could pronounce the word. So difficult a word, two syllables, or three, I guess.
Yeah, I'm being from the South.
I know. That's a problem. But yeah, I like talking. I talk to some authors kind of outside the paranormal once in a while, and so far people seem to like it. So
Well, it's funny because on my program, in the past, we did an entire program on Benghazi. And that is incredibly interesting to me because it shows, I think, the level of misinformation and even cover-ups. And then more importantly, more so than there being cover-ups, I think what it is that with a situation like Benghazi and the attack on the consulate there that occurred, and that was, of course, a huge controversy, but I think that what that shows is that there are aspects of American politics that, first of all, as we all know, take place well outside the boundaries of the continental United States. And then second of all, a lot of them are governed by agencies that don't effectively communicate with one another. Patrick Moynihan, I believe he was a New York senator, he had written a book that's fantastic. I had it on my desk here, but now it's someplace else, and it's called Secrecy. That book doesn't look at, anything along the lines of the JFK assassination. It doesn't look at, conspiracies in that sense. It looks just very matter-of-factly, from an intelligence perspective, at the CIA and the FBI and agencies like that, and the lack of communication on an interdepartmental basis. A lot of the time these agencies, because of the fact that they're trying to gain access to certain avenues of information, and of course it's very easy to do that nowadays, we all know. We hear about it every day in the news. Sometimes the intelligence that's gathered is not released even to other agencies. You'd think that agencies within the United States government would communicate with one another in the interest of national security. We don't want to communicate that information maybe to the public in every instance, and certainly not to foreign governments unless there's a need to know. But the thing is that even the departments like the CIA and the FBI often fail in those kind of communications and allowing access to vital information. And Moynihan's whole premise is that this may have prolonged what we perceived culturally as the Cold War, because Intel already provided that really Russia was with the failing economic system that led toward, that was taking place during the end of the Cold War. In those final years there, intelligence agencies that were well aware of this weren't communicating it with one another, and we perceived the Far East as being more of a threat than it actually had been. And you see this happen time and time again, and I think that we see it with Benghazi too, that there were different agencies that have been and are still controlling operations in North Africa and things like that. And people always say the government knows, it's a conspiracy, but the truth of the matter is, I think I just put a little Alex Jones out there. But the thing is about these conspiracies, the real conspiracy, I think, sometimes has less to do with what government is intentionally hiding from the people and has more to do with what government agencies are hiding from one another. And that's where the intel leaks and all this stuff gets interesting, because when one agency finds out something that they can't confirm and the leak came from another agency, and then there's this great big bombshell that's blown wide open, the press jumps after it, and they, let's say, go to the director of the FBI and say, what's going on? And the FBI director says, this is news to me. It's a really interesting scenario, but I think this happens more often than people realize.
That's why I always often wonder if the government is capable or smart enough to pull off some of these things that people give them credit for.
That's a good question, Jim. Let me tell you something. I was producing a talk radio program here in Asheville, North Carolina a few years ago, and a state representative, Charles Thomas, joined me on the program. And Charles is just a good guy, dear fellow, man. He's his head and his heart are in the right place, and you can't say that for many politicians these days. But I was talking with him between the breaks, and I asked him about his feelings about 9/11. And he did say this off the record, but it's nothing revelatory, and I don't think he'd mind me repeating him here. But Representative Thomas said, I think that my feeling about that is having worked in Washington and seen how things in Washington go, I would find it very difficult to endorse the opinion that a grand conspiracy actually did orchestrate that, because I don't think, frankly, that people in government are capable enough to pull it off. So now I'll tell you what I do think happened with 9/11. I think that maybe that there was a bit of foresight. I think it's already clear that there was knowledge of a potential terror attack. I think that there were warnings made, and there were certainly some testimonies given pertaining to Dick Cheney being in a bunker, and knowing that there was something going on and all this. I can't remember the exact political figure who had actually given testimony about that. And then when Dick Cheney gave a statement that seemed to contrast with that, he was very shocked and amazed. This did appear in a controversial documentary called Loose Change, which had, I think there was some good information in it and also maybe some misleading information. And I can say the exact same thing about the 9/11, the popular mechanics debunking 9/11 myths. Because, again, I'm curious, or rather I'm skeptical of anyone, addressing the skeptics here, I'm skeptical of anyone who would go into it saying, we're going to debunk the entire 9/11 thing. And popular mechanics has an answer for every single conspiracy theory, whereas the conspiracy theorists have written their books and they have literally debunked every debunking that Popular Mechanics has put forth. I think obviously what we see is that people are filtering every matter of question through an ideological window, when in truth, with 9/11, there was information that they knew about it beforehand, and that maybe preventative measures were not taken effectively enough to prevent the attack. 2, the NTSB report, partially thanks to the pressure put on them by journalists at Infowars.com, Alex Jones' website, they did release a statement, that said, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't the NTSB. That's the wrong agency. It was I have to remember which agency it was, but they had actually released a report. I'm thinking of the TWA Flight 800 thing, which I've been researching as well. But there was a report that had essentially said, yes, we cannot account for the cause of the free fall with the Twin Towers. It is consistent with a controlled demolition. But that does not mean that a controlled demolition actually occurred. It's just that what we observed there was consistent with that. Now, that is interesting to me because it was acknowledged as an anomaly. But that doesn't mean that it was an inside job. And you see the conspiracy theorists will take it and say, there you go, clear evidence. That may not be the case at all. All that means is that there was a structural anomaly that has been acknowledged by investigators who were actually tasked by government to investigate the 9/11 attacks. So those are a couple of things. I think that all we can say really is that there probably was intel and there were certain things that were overlooked. We could infer from that either there's incredible ineptitude in government, or B, that if it was allowed to happen, that it was viewed as something that could have been politically, I don't know, it could have been utilized for a purpose of benefit for one or more parties. For instance, invasion of the Middle East, something like that. Some would call that a false flag, but I think that the true definition of a false flag is actually carrying out the attack themselves on the American people and then blaming someone else. I don't really think that that's what happened at 9/11. But again, I think that there were a lot of intel issues, a lot of questions about what led to essentially allowing the attacks to occur in light of those intel, that information that they had preemptively. And then finally, the anomalies in terms of the structural concerns regarding the Trade Center. And I'm always kind of cautious when I see somebody claiming that they have all the answers, either in considering a actual conspiracy or attempting to debunk it. And that's what we see both Popular Mechanics and then, of course, all the conspiracy theorists doing. There's always middle ground. There's always something in the middle, and there's usually some dirt that you'll find there that piles up. It may be a little small pile of dirt, but you're going to find dirt in the middle almost in every case. And that's where I tend to go with my line of thought. I don't gravitate to the radical extremes. I go in the middle and I say, what do the facts actually say? And I think with 9/11, there are some facts that are still worth looking into.
Yeah, and I always laugh when I hear these conspiracy theories that it was an inside job and they brought it down. How else is that building going to fall? I mean, is it going to blow into a million pieces and disappear by itself if an airplane hits it? I mean, there's only so many ways the building can fall. It's just due to gravity, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a...
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sitting here Googling trying to, because I misspoke and said the NTSB, which is the National Transportation Security Board, but it was the National Institute for Standards of Technology, I believe, that issued the report, if I'm remembering correctly. That was the agency that issued the report discussing the free fall of the towers. So before someone listens and says that guy's an idiot, I do like to point out that it was the National Institute for Standards of Technology, if I remember correctly. So, but anyway, I mean, again, that alone, Jim, doesn't point to a conspiracy. It just points to an anomaly. I mean, what if we, at the end of the day, found out that there had been a cover-up to hide information about a terrible structural flaw with the buildings, and this was going to be a great big insurance liability, and we didn't want America to know all about this issue, and so that was covered up. I mean, see, the thing is that I think that cover-ups and conspiracies genuinely do occur, but I think that what the problem is that with the lack of fundamental information about what exactly is going on, partially as a result of secrecy, like Moynihan talked about, like so many others do, I think that either between agencies or, of course, between government and the United States citizenry, with secrecy afoot, what happens is we don't have a clear set of data. We don't have all the information needed to be able to discern what has actually happened in these instances, no matter how thorough, for instance, the 9/11 Commission report is. And anyone who wants to say that all the information needed was there in the report, well, why did the 9/11 Commission report, the initial draft, why did that not address the World Trade Center 7 collapse? Now, of course, I think one of the reasons was because the Institute, had the National Institute for Standards of Technology, they had been conducting their own survey of what led to that collapse. They were trying to come to a determination separately on that, and I don't think that report maybe was complete at the time that the 9/11 Commission report was published, which is interesting, too, because think about this. They rush to get this thing out because they want to give, full disclosure, get all this information out to the public when the investigation is still ongoing. Then years later, this report comes out that's talking about, okay, well, this is the reason why we feel that World Trade Center 7 collapsed. I love it. Popular Mechanics, okay? I've actually got a copy of that on my desk right here. Popular Mechanics, Debunking 9/11 Myths. They put out a revised edition that now contradicts the claims of the conspiracy theorists pertaining to World Trade Center 7 when that information wasn't available early on. And it's so funny because it's just this, see, I got you. See, no, I got you. No, I got you. And they just go back and forth, and they're just biting one another. One of the criticisms with Popular Mechanics, for instance, had been the fact that while they said we interviewed hundreds of individuals who were witnesses, but they don't list information pertaining to the sources for a lot of that data or how to, how independent investigators like you or I could follow up with those sources and check their references. What's funny is they'll sit there and they'll say, we're scientific, you're all wrong, but then they don't cite their sources. Not all of them at least. And so, again, the question is, at the end of the day, we have to be able to have full accountability, full transparency, and nobody seems to be willing to give that. And as long as there's not full transparency and we don't have a complete data set to make these determinations, we're always going to have questions. And when you have questions, when there's gray area, people are always, inevitably, going to assert that there's a conspiracy because they allow their imagination to fill out the rest that they can't see for themselves.
Yeah, somebody at one point when I first started my show said you should do a conspiracy-based show and just be the biggest nut you can be on any one way with it.
Alex Jones is already doing that.
I know. I'm like, yeah, maybe. But
well, I'll tell you this also about Alex. I want to say this, and I try to take every opportunity to say this that I can. I think Alex Jones is a brilliant person, and I'm not playing a little game here and going to say I think he's a brilliant promoter or something, that he goes out and says crazy stuff just to
he's that too, by the way. I'll say that.
I think there is some of that, but no, I think clearly if you listen to Alex Jones, he's only like 39 years old. The guy is incredibly well read. The guy has a incredible sense of knowing about what's going on. The guy's got cojones. I mean, come on. Infiltrating Bohemian Grove. I mean, the kind of stuff that he does, the people he's willing to confront on camera, he is not afraid. And I admire all those things about Alex Jones. I think, though, the problem is that like a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists, Alex Jones, and this is the famous example, and people who've heard me on other interviews probably have already heard this, but right after the Boston Marathon bombing, Alex Jones goes, sorry, folks, but this just reeks of an inside job. This is a false flag. And the whole point is that how did he know 2 hours after the fact? Again, based on pure speculation, based on only his fundamental survey of history and the history of false flag attacks. He'll always talk about the burning of the Reichstag, which precipitated Hitler's rise to power, and then, of course, the real true rise of the Third Reich prior to the Second World War. But the truth of the matter is that historians, some of them, it is inferred often that the burning of the Reichstag was indeed a false flag, but I don't know that the evidence is necessarily conclusive about that. That's the most likely possibility because it would have been, effective politically for thrusting Hitler into power. There are some historians that still contest the fact that it wasn't actually, I believe, a socialist dissident, that had actually burned the Reichstag. So the point is that Alex Jones, again, while there's still a bit of question historically about instances like that, there are actually less questionable instances here in U.S. history involving false flags that are quite clear-cut what was going on, and even government documents that talk about whether or not they were carried out, Operation Northwoods and things like that, for instance. The institution of deliberate false flags. There's a lot more precedent for that in the U.S. than, in pre-Nazi Germany, but, actually the Nazi Party would have been there, but you know what I mean. So the point is that people will look at that historical incident and they'll say, this is historical precedent for the fact that it happens, and therefore I know a lot about this, and therefore I'm, Alex Jones being the guy here saying this, I probably have an ability to perceive when in media or when in American politics even this kind of thing happens today, the telltale signs. And here 2 hours after the marathon bombing in Boston, okay, Tsarnaev was not, a household name. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev had not appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone yet at that point. And yet here is Alex Jones saying false flag. Alex Jones is still saying false flag, which, think about this. This gets into shaky ground because if you're so willing to assert that this was an inside job in the Americas, what you're also asserting is that the men who are believed to have actually carried out the crime are innocent. or that they were complicit in some sort of a conspiracy, or that they were misled, or they were mind controlled. But see, that's a lot of speculation. We don't have the facts to back that up. You'll see the people in the conspiracy circles, no matter how intelligent they are, and Alex Jones is incredibly intelligent, but he allows that worldview that he has amassed over years and years of doing this, he allows that to color and filter every single thing that happens in the media, every single thing that he reads in the news, everything that he talks about on his program when he gets behind that hallowed microphone down there, at the, the Global Communications Network, I guess, that carries him and everything. I think it's really good what he does, but sometimes you got to reel in on that and say, okay, I don't have all the facts just yet, so I'm not going to leap to this conclusion. So the question I would have about someone like Alex Jones, and coming back to what you said about, do a program that has to do with just crazy conspiracy theories, if someone is willing to leap to the lunatic fringe at the outset like that, is that more for purpose of generating talk and driving hits to the website and increasing ratings? I'm not accusing Alex Jones of that by any means. I'm just saying, though, that it's easy for people to assume that that's what's going on if you're willing to jump to the extreme. And that's why I'm always more cautious. You'll notice I'm not going to say 9/11 is an inside job. I'll say that there are anomalies. There are some anomalies with regard to the Boston Marathon bombing as well. But most of the evidence also points to the Tsarnaev brothers and the fact that the radicalization of the elder brother probably led to this. And what's a true conspiracy to me, or if not a conspiracy, at very least questionable, is the fact that Time magazine carried an article that talked about the fact that the eldest Tsarnaev brother was interrogated twice by the FBI, and yet they still couldn't prevent him from carrying out a terrorist attack against U.S. citizens. So what are our agencies up there, like the FBI, doing if they can interview a guy like that who's a suspected person of interest? Furthermore, he was implicated in a possible homicide that had occurred when a drug deal went down about a year or two beforehand, and he'd never been caught before that. So you mean to tell me that the FBI can be monitoring a person who is actually an accomplice in a killing, a drug-related killing, and also a person who was apparently a radicalized, fundamentalist, and then also a person who was willing to go out there and take American lives, and they can interview this guy twice and still not figure out what's going on. After admitting, as Tim Clemente, the former agent, had said on national television, that we have the ability to monitor all those phone calls, not just his voicemails. I mean, come on, folks. What are they using the intel agencies and the NSA and all these groups that have access to this intelligence, what are they using these surveillance programs for if they can't stop someone like Tsarnaev? What the hell's going on?
Well, they're behind TMZ.com. That's all they're using that for.
See, again, the people who want to look at this conspiracy theory, they want to find something that's really just meaty and compelling and that's more interesting than what the truth is. And the truth is that our intelligence agencies are watching everybody, and yet they still failed to prevent 9/11. They still failed to catch the Tsarnaev brothers, Yeah. So what the hell are they surveilling everyone for if it's that ineffective, these programs? And then they come out after the fact and say, well, actually there were approximately 12 instances where we have thwarted terrorists, but we can't tell you what they were. We couldn't tell you when this actually happened. So are we dealing with largely ineffective surveillance programs by an authoritarian government that really is just more comfortable with being able to watch everyone than actually preventing things that are going to harm the American populace? These are the tough questions, and these are the questions that our lawmakers and our politicians need to be asking, that they are asking, and that, frankly, if you're sitting behind a microphone like you or I, Jim, we would do better to ask those questions as well as members of the citizenry, rather than jumping to the lunatic fringe and saying that it was an inside job and that government did it. It's insane. But you see that more and more in America today, and this is what I call the conspiracy mind. And I'm telling you, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too. Are we not in a position in America today where people are apparently more inclined to believe in conspiracy theories along those lines? I mean, doesn't it seem that way?
I think so. And I think, and this is opening a can of worms here. I think that's why religion is failing, because people are so skeptical and so debating and so not taking things at face value.
Yeah.
That's why.
I think you're right.
So,
I think with religion, I mean, again, people now, I've looked. Yeah, let's go ahead and take it there, buddy.
Like I said, you heard. I should have a sound effect for that when I open a can of worms, but.
Well, with religion, we've heard for a long time the true authorship of the Gospels. I like to try and go about this in an unbiased way. I'm not trying to advocate the truth of the Gospels or to make a compelling case for the true authorship being other than, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, whoever. But the point is that, there are these conspiracies that have been asserted for a long time now that question whether what we know as Christianity is actually true. Now, frankly, I think that, again, outside the scope of religion, I think that, in terms of just the historical importance of those documents and their relation to a Jewish rabbi that we know as Jesus Christ, I think that, I think that historically there is evidence that that this was based on events that actually happened. I think that the old expression "lost in translation" comes to mind in the sense that, following the Council of Nicaea, following the numerous rewritings of biblical scripture in translations that have occurred over the years, let alone the fact that scholars have already pointed out differences in the interpretations of certain terminology, just from the Hebrew to the Greek and the Greek to whatever else, whatever other languages that these have been translated into over the years. The point is that, when language is still a barrier and has been and remains today, and we're utilizing language to try and convey these messages, sure, things are going to get lost in the mix. Furthermore, ideologically, one question has been, how much with regard to the resurrection and the actual miracles that Christ performed in his lifetime, how much of that was asserted after the fact or maybe even embellished by believers who wanted to, support the deification of the Rabbi Jesus as a man. I don't think that you can question the historical concepts that are being expressed in the Gospels. I think that some of the information may have been kind of broken over the years, misinterpreted, maybe even embellished in some instances, but it's led to these conspiracies that it was actually a Roman plot to try and control people, and the true authorship of the Gospels had nothing to do with the actual authors of the Gospels as we know them, the disciples, the apostles. The point is I think that people today, because they're willing to gravitate toward a conspiracy, they don't go and look at what historically we can learn about this. They don't go and look at Benjamin of Tudela in the 1100s going to a French commune where the constable there had been known as what was called in the Greek desposini, which is a term that literally refers to the bloodline, if you will, of Christ. And the fact that, apparently, if you go to Oxford University, I've had many friends and scholars over the years who have studied there who'll tell you that, there are actually historical documents that one can find. You have to be able to have access to them, but they're not kept from the public. They're just kept in academic institutions. And these actually show that there are non-biblical references to historical, this historical Jesus character and whatnot. And so I think that, we can look at it historically and say, something happened. We can look at it spiritually and say that's a matter of faith. And then the conspiracy theorists get in there and say, question everything. And thus, yes, they question religion just as well, which may be good in some instances, may also be bad. And the problem is that, unfortunately, while it's good to question, I think that a lot of people think that they're being skeptical by questioning, when in truth what they do is they question, and thus they remove their old, outmoded ideas, concepts, whether those be religious or political or whatever, and then they replace them, oftentimes, with unbridled speculation that is sometimes far worse than the conventional line of thought that they threw out initially. And I think that, again, what we end up finding is that we see that there are people who question everything about the religion that they were raised in, but then they don't have any problem leaping to conclusions about something like a false flag attack, carried out against the American people. Again, there's historical precedent for that. If you want to look up, documents, such as Operation Northwoods and whatnot, you can see that this sort of thing, for purposes of psychological warfare and social engineering, these sorts of things have been actually proposed in the past. But what we have to do is we have to be very careful about the way that we go about looking at that information. And we have to be very careful when we assert that this might be going on today, because when we do so, we're giving in to speculation when we may not have all the facts, and that's what people do. Yes, it's led to the destruction of religion. It's, in part, I think, led to the destruction of the nuclear family, the American family in some ways. It's reversed the roles that we've had in terms of, what roles individuals in a family actually play. Again, there's good and there's bad. I don't want to make the feminists angry now by saying that women shouldn't go out and work or something like that. I know plenty of families where there are stay-at-home dads, and the mom goes and works. If that works for your family, that's fine, but I think what we need to acknowledge is that there are changes that are occurring fundamentally in our society, and when people are not armed with facts, they make a lot of suppositions about this, and sometimes those aren't healthy suppositions as well.
You just, you nail it. That's the funny thing. Okay, I want to jump back. I wrote this down. Thank God I wrote this down before I opened that can of worms.
Oh, there it went.
Yeah. So
I think we emptied the can of worms just now. But go ahead.
We're shuffling back a little bit. So.
Yeah.
The follow-up question now. The first follow-up question.
I shouldn't assert. I was going to pick on one of my favorite skeptics that's a quote-unquote feminist critic. But anyway, we'll come back to that later. Go ahead.
Back to the Rolling Stone thing. They put him on the cover. That's pure PR by Rolling Stone, because I hadn't heard about Rolling Stone in a couple of years, right? That's all that was.
It wasn't PR. They didn't pay me to say that.
No. Putting the terrorist on the cover. That was all. Somebody heard there was photos. They went out and bought them and put them on the cover. That was all. They weren't trying to be bold or anything. That was just trying to get their magazine to be financially feasible for a while. I'm sure, based off all the new PR with it.
It's funny because Rolling Stone has had a long precedent, of edgy political content. Matt Taibbi, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, his last name looks like an alien crawling across the Martian surface or something like that. But Matt, I've been a critic of Matt Taibbi, I think it's Taibbi. I think I've been a critic of his writing for a number of years because he seems to be someone to me who, as opposed to just trying to articulate a point eloquently, which he is entirely capable of doing, he has to conform to that Rolling Stone manuscript of style. I actually own probably 2 copies of the AP, what's it actually called? The Associated Press writing guide, or whatever it is, the guide to style, as well as Strunk and White. I've observed a lot of the different style guides that the mainstream news publications, including the AP, New York Times, and whatnot, use for proper writing of journalism. And Matt Taibbi, he's clearly able to articulate his points just fine, but then he has to, pepper everything with foul language and all this junk so that it's edgy, so that little dumbasses out there who normally wouldn't find reading about politics, they wouldn't find that interesting. Now it's going to be edgy and it's going to be bold, and now we're going to feel cool because we hear Matt Taibbi dropping the F word talking about President Obama or George Bush or, Michael Hastings, who he was friends with. Taibbi's a great writer, but, I think that the problem with Rolling Stone is that they always think that they've got to save face, and they've got to make it palpable for the young audience by doing it in a way that, and again, they've done that for years. They've had also some really damn good writers in the past, too. Hunter Thompson is one of my very favorite writers, political journalists, and novelists of all time. And I think he's right up there with Fitzgerald and with, Hemingway in terms of the great American writers. But I'll tell you this, too. I think that guys like Taibbi and the current staff, including going right up to Jan Werner, there at the Rolling Stone staff, I think that they've lived in the shadow of the precedent set by Hunter Thompson since his passing, and they've never really been able to measure up, and so then they have to end up doing these desperate things like putting Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, put his glamour shot on the cover of the magazine. It's absurd and so transparent what they're trying to do, and yeah, you're totally right, it's just PR, and that's the reason that they present things the way that they have. If they really wanted to do what they do and do it well, they wouldn't have someone like Taibbi trying to emulate Hunter Thompson. They would allow Taibbi to go out there and be a journalist and be the damn good writer that he actually is, without having to be this clone of Hunter Thompson. You're never going to be Hunter Thompson. Quit trying, okay? Just be yourself. Be a human being and be good at it. That's all. That's the whole thing. That's the key. That's all there is to it. And I'm telling you, if people would do that, if Rolling Stone would do that, they wouldn't have to pull little stunts like putting Dzhokhar Tsarnaev on the cover of their magazine to increase their readership, would they? No, because people would go there because they're an actual authority, and they're actually providing good, compelling, reasonable content, not this tripe that's basically, filtered to try and look like something that was written in their magazine about the Kentucky Derby 35 years ago. So, with all respect to both Taibbi and to Hunter Thompson, one of my favorite authors ever. I think that Rolling Stone, they're trying to live up to something that, they lost a long time ago, and I realize that's tough, but I think that, trying to clone and emulate, that's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, and as we were just talking, you put your show on hiatus, and you brought it back. It's different now. Well, a little bit different. It's fine. You change and evolve as a person and as a company and as a magazine even, as it were. Yeah.
You absolutely do. I mean, look at how many magazines over the past... I've been a subscriber to Time Magazine for... probably almost a decade. Sometimes I pick it up and I flip through it and I wonder why I'm still subscribed. But, I've seen them go from being, more to the left to certainly not more to the right, but they kind of come more to the center. and they'll feature Rich Lowry, the editor of National Review, and have him write a couple of editorials. I mean, I've seen them make a concerted effort to try and be less biased, and I think that's good. I don't want to see somebody conforming to the political ideology or the social ideology that I like. I want to see a magazine that is literally making a concerted effort to try and be balanced and to try not to float an ideology across to their readership or to their listenership or whatever else, I'm a real firm believer in the radical center, that insane area on the middle of the fence, that spot where if you do it right, you can balance and you don't have to fall off the side of the seesaw, because they're in the truth, aside from the ideological hubris that collects on the edges. That's where you're going to find the reasonable, true perspective. I've got a friend who I would consider to be more of a conservative thinker, friend and a mentor, in fact, and about, twice a year we get together and have cookouts and stuff. It's my buddy's dad, and it's funny because it's one of those situations where we'll go have the cookouts and stuff, and, we'll get together. I'd mention his name, but he is a stockbroker with one of the major banks in America, and therefore I cannot really, due to, the use of his name in conjunction with FDIC and all this sort of stuff, he wouldn't appreciate that. So I shouldn't say his name out loud, but he and I will get together and talk from time to time. I've always considered him to be more of the conservative ilk, but he approached me a long time ago and said, Micah, somebody needs to do a real, truly politically centrist program that looks at, the dirt on both ends and brings it down to the middle and says, look, we're not going to put an ideological spin on it. These are just the facts. You decide. And I think that was instrumental in leading me not only to doing that with the Micah-Hanks program, but also to do it with Gralien Report and with all my writing, too. I don't go out there and say, the skeptics are wrong, or, turn around and make fun of the paranormal believers either. I just say, look, there's some horse crap on both sides. These are the facts, and you can do with it what you want, but don't make a story around this that doesn't exist. Sometimes the facts are just that, Jim. They're just facts. And those facts don't always tell a story. When it comes to the paranormal, for instance, the problem is that we have these strange, anomalous facts that have to do with strange objects seen in the sky, altered states of consciousness, bedtime encounters people have with apparently non-human beings, all kinds of strange stuff that, for the most part, probably has more to do with psychology. But we try and weave this narrative out of it, which has led to this supposition, again, among quote-unquote ufologists, and even I've become skeptical of that term, ufologist. I don't even like hardly being called a ufologist. I like to say I study unexplained aerial phenomena. I'm a UFO researcher. But ufologist now, unfortunately, has become a dirty word, because if you're a ufologist, people think that you study abductions and aliens, and frankly, to me, UFOs has very little to do with alien anything. We don't know what the hell UFOs are, aside from, as we've said at the outset, Jacques Vallée called them an apparently technological object or device that contains an incredible amount of energy in a very small space. And so the point is that, again, that alone doesn't indicate the presence of extraterrestrial life visiting Earth. And I see in the paranormal circles, especially in ufology as they call it, I see people trying to say that if you believe in UFOs or if you want to research them, you've got to study aliens, you've got to study abductions. And I say, no, you don't. Break all that apart. Study them separately. Let's try and understand the individual phenomenon. I wonder how many alien abduction researchers are aware of the fact that Carl Jung, the psychologist, had conducted a number of surveys among his patients that described grotesque goblins or hobgoblins that they would see standing at the foot of their bed at night. It sounds an awful lot like two things. One, alien abductions that we hear about so commonly today, more commonly 10 and 20 years ago. It also sounds a lot like sleep paralysis, which in the last 2 decades, more and more people have become aware of. I don't think every person who's ever believed that they had a nighttime encounter with an alien being believes that they were an abductee, and more people who've become aware of the phenomenon known as sleep paralysis, which I too have experienced myself, they I think, have begun to question whether or not there is indeed something that can occur physiologically that could lead to the perception of that experience. And so that doesn't explain all instances of abduction. Having spoken with people like Whitley Strieber myself, I do believe that there's something that goes on, but I also know that Whitley Strieber has sat there and told me, and I've had men who spoke English in government suits come into my room at night and put a probe in my ear. Those aren't aliens. Those were men in suits who spoke English. Whitley believed that these were some sort of government agents. And the thing is that that's another component to this whole abduction thing, the human angle. But we have to be careful when we have those facts. We have to be careful with weaving a narrative out of them. and trying to assert that there's actually some sort of a story. That's what Stephen King does. That shouldn't be what Jim or Micah do. You know, we have to be very careful about taking the facts that we find and trying to make a story out of it, which is the exact same thing that we see the conspiracy theorists do. They don't have fundamental bits of information, and so they fill in the gaps with speculation, and thus this story emerges. You know, humans like to have a nice beginning, middle, and end. And, you know, for guys like John Lear and a lot of the folks out there in the UFO circles, the end game is that the aliens are eventually going to enslave us all and take over planet Earth. Now, that could be a possibility. I just want to see proof of the aliens first. Okay?
Wait, time out. Let's pause right here at that point. The aliens are going to take planet Earth and enslave us all. Okay. And they've flown here from Deep Space Nine. There we go. Good reference. With high technology and sneaking around above our technology realms. Just what they need. A bunch of lazy people. Yeah. Okay.
That's a good point. You know, it's like what I see is that there are two interpretations of the supposed extraterrestrial myth, which are, okay, if these UFOs are representative of ETs, they're either here to help us, which is the space brother idea, or they are here to conduct, you know, whether or not their intention is literally to enslave and to intentionally harm us. The other perception is that these ETs maybe are just so callous and that they really just don't care, and that their end game is just to use us for purposes of, you know, hybridization and genetic manipulation and all this kind of junk. There are some people who have claimed over the years that they have physical evidence that you know, conclusively proves that something's going on. And these include such things as probes and all different kinds of things. And I'll just tell you right now, I've studied a variety of different, you know, little-known clinical disorders and things such as Hashimoto's encephalopathy and, you know, a lot of different kinds of bizarre conditions that can set in due to deficiencies in the body or the misfunction of certain processes within the body, metabolic pathways and channels that open or close for whatever reason, and they lead to the production of, you know, more or less of a certain tryptamine or something along those lines or something close to it. When you study these sorts of circumstances, when you study the different kinds of things that can affect the human body and which often can do so and continue to go undiagnosed, I think what you begin to find is that there are, at times, potential physical explanations for what may appear to be a mechanical, or at least we'll say a metallic, probe, or maybe some other kind of a substance that is found in a person's body where there's no scar and where there's literally what appears to be muscle tissue built around it. I've actually studied what are known as iron channelopathies and things like this that I think that could I think there's a compelling argument that could be made in terms of whether or not these could have led to the discovery of inexplicable objects found within people that are often metallic in nature. That might not explain all the cases, though. I think that there are a lot of situations that could lead to a person who may not, exhibit outward symptoms of schizophrenia or some sort of a psychosis, but that nonetheless, as a result of deficiencies and things like that, and perhaps the intake of too much even caffeine, could cause hallucinatory experiences. We have to be able to take all these things into consideration when we're studying UFO abduction, not a guy sitting with his person lying on the couch hypnotizing them. And so, it's just a very complex, very, very, very complex issue that has to be looked at clinically much more carefully. But again, coming back to what we're talking about here, the enslaving of humans and whatnot, when we look at all these kinds of things, sure, there may be physical evidence that can be found at times. But I think that even if we were to prove without a question that iron channelopathies, and bizarre, experiences that people have based on different kinds of conditions that they may have and things like that, whether or not diagnosed, if we were to find even clear, hard evidence of an intrusive technology on par with the kinds of probes and things that some of the abductees talk about, again, the question I ask is, without an alien body lying here in front of us that we can dissect, without proof of that, how can we say that these abduction experiences, that these probes, that this apparent technology is evidence of alien intervention? There could be something else going on. Stephen Greer, when he had that Atacama humanoid, And if your listeners aren't familiar with that, there was the film called Sirius, and this was one of the mainstays of the film that Dr. Greer put out, the head of the Disclosure Project and the popular exopolitical activist. And in the film, he features this little mummified body that looks sort of human, but really it looks a lot like what we would call culturally an alien. And what they hoped to do was to be able to prove genetically, okay, look, we don't have, this thing doesn't appear to be human. But now tell me this, again, philosophically, if we apply logic to it, just because it's not human, but it was found on Earth, what about that points to something extraterrestrial, like Greer says? What if it was a non-human species that had evolved here somewhere on planet Earth? Just to be able to say that we have found something that is non-human, just to be able to say that we have found some sort of a strange technology of inexplicable origin, and frankly, just to say that people claim that they have non-human encounters, none of those things alone prove that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it ain't aliens. There you go.
There you go. And so, to put a little button on, or a bow on that, I guess, on a button, probably a bow would be nicer. We're a reality TV show for these people, and they come down and mess with us once in a while.
That's as good an excuse, as good an explanation as any I've heard.
Yeah, could you imagine, being there and you could, hey, let's go mess with Micah tonight. That'd be kind of cool, and then he'll talk about it on the show. We can hear him talking about it.
Wouldn't you or I, Jim? Wouldn't you or I be the perfect people? If there was a broad-reaching disinformation campaign, or furthermore, if there were extraterrestrials trying to interact with guys like us, who could actually reach the lunatic fringe? Wouldn't we be the perfect kind of people to come and screw with? Think about it. Have you been abducted?
Not yet.
Me neither. What the hell?
It's always that guy that has the Coors Light can in his hand and a NASCAR T-shirt to bring NASCAR back around in this conversation.
Maybe Stephen Hawking was right. I really got after Stephen Hawking. I was angry when he gave a lecture a few years ago talking about the possibilities of, alien life and discussing the Fermi paradox and things like this. And in that discussion at the outset, he kind of gave a disclaimer and said, and from this discussion, I'm omitting reports of UFOs, because if UFO reports were actually evidence of extraterrestrial intervention, then why would ETs only reach out to cranks and weirdos? Maybe he was right after all. And actually, to qualify that statement again, I should partially agree with him in the sense that he maybe is making the statement that UFOs aren't maybe the best evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. But I think that the problem with Stephen Hawking's interpretation of the phenomenon is that based on a fundamental lack of knowledge of the history of UFO studies. He looks at UFOs as being purely bunk, and that he asserts in pointing out the cranks and weirdos statement that UFOs are only seen by cranks and weirdos, and therefore UFOs are not probably a physical, tangible, valid phenomenon as stated by the likes of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon, as stated by the likes of, I'll tell you this, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and probably other U.S. presidents, Gerald Ford while he was still on the Senate. Those individuals were American citizens who also took serious interest in UFOs. And what's interesting, and actually I suspect strongly that probably Dwight Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy did as well, without having to assert, conspiracies regarding Majestic 12 and all this sort of stuff. I think that there have been a lot of U.S. presidents who have been interested in the UFO thing because certain UFO sightings with the Foo Fighters were taking place during the Second World War. There's even a likelihood that FDR was interested in this, or at very least was aware of it. But I don't think that we'd call those men, okay, well, they are U.S. presidents. Maybe they were cranks and weirdos. But the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think that they're unreliable witnesses like Stephen Hawking would assert based on only a peripheral knowledge of UFO reports. He probably has no idea that there were U.S. presidents who had interest in this, that Ronald Reagan had actually seen one while he was governor of California, that Jimmy Carter had seen one while he was governor of Georgia, and that he had furthermore gone to the director of the CIA when he took office, who at the time was George Herbert Walker Bush, asked about UFOs, and Bush told him, sir, that information is released only on a need-to-know basis. And my question fundamentally is this. The director of the CIA tells the President of the United States, sir, that information is not, you do not have a proper clearance for that information. That is only released on a need-to-know basis. If that's the case, if the President of the United States hasn't got clearance to know about it, who the hell does?
Yeah, I was going to say. And how do you get it then?
And how do you get it? And again, I'm not so convinced that the government really is withholding as much information about UFOs as a lot of the exopolitical activists out there would like to say. But what I do think is that there is some information that for, security reasons is probably still investigated. And sure, there are still files that are kept, probably the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, well after Blue Book, who continued looking into UFOs. I think Stanton Friedman and certain other ufologists have already made that clear. The problem is that they also, guys like Stan, who I have tremendous respect for, and I've known him and met him and even interviewed him several times. But Stan and I, we were sitting together on a panel at the International UFO Congress this past February. Richard Dolan, Stanton Friedman, and I. It was probably that. If I had to say there was one thing in my career studying all this weirdness that's been a true achievement, it was being able to sit on that stage with those three guys in front of an audience and have a debate. I was the skeptic. But I wasn't saying that UFOs don't exist. We all believed, yeah, sure, there's something going on, but I kept asking, what is going on? Stanton and I, we differ on one thing. We know that the government has taken interest in this. Stanton thinks that they're hiding information about extraterrestrials. I don't. And if that information is being withheld from people, I don't know that the government has all the answers. I think that they may be, I think that the assertion of an extraterrestrial hypothesis in relation to UFOs could be as speculative an endeavor undertaken by government as it would be by civilians like you or I, or people writing books about abductions and UFOs. So, we don't have all the answers, and I'm not going to tell you that there's clearly an alien presence like Stanton and certain other guys do. I'm going to reel in on that a bit and say there's clearly a UFO presence. We don't know what the UFO presence is, but we cannot say that the terms UFO and extraterrestrial have to be mutually exclusive with one another. That's not the case. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, to me, is a less likely hypothesis to the true nature of most UFO reports. It is only a possibility. And in the grand scheme of things, whether we're looking at conspiracies, whether we're looking at UFOs, whether we're looking at anything, I guess the fundamental point I like to try and get across to people, and hopefully folks who've heard this interview will understand this, question everything, but don't assume when you don't have information to fill in those gaps. Where the questions lie, it's so easy just to assume. If we could step back and say, okay, well, without information about that, we can't jump to that conclusion. All we know is that there's this, and these are what the facts tell us. Based on these facts, we could come to some determinations, but we can't tell the whole story. And until we have all the facts, we won't know what the whole story is. So that's the only thing I tell people to do. Don't jump to these conclusions in the absence of those facts.
So we've got about a minute left. So I've got one more quick, well, obviously, since I just told you I have a minute left, I got a quick question for you. Sure. And we'll revisit this, and we'll talk about your books next time I have you on.
Yeah, right.
micah-hanks.com, okay. Now that I've got that out there, you can go to find everything that he does from there. It's a great site if you haven't been there. If you could interview one person, who would it be?
It would be Dr. Jacques Vallée. That's the first one that comes to mind. There are political figures and people I'd love to talk with. I would love to interview George Herbert Walker Bush. I'd love to just talk to him about, his time as CIA director, his time as a vice president and then an actual president of the United States, his potential connections to what happened at the Dallas motorcade at the time of the JFK assassination. Those would be the two I'd want to interview, George Herbert Walker Bush and Dr. Jacques Vallée.
Well, Micah, it went really fast. Really good, though. I enjoyed it, every minute of it. I'm not saying that. So we'll have to do it again, of course. I think we picked another date, still pending here, so we'll get back to that now.
We'll certainly do it again, yeah. I'll actually have another book out by then, so I promise we can talk about that. Yeah,
we'll talk about your books and all that other stuff, but I want to thank you for hopping on with me.
Oh, dude, it's been my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Let's definitely do it again. Look, anytime, man. If you ever need anybody, just give me a call. I'll be standing by.
Okay. The same goes for you. If you ever get in a total tight pinch and need somebody to at least talk to, I can do that for you.
Actually, I should get you on regardless at some point. I always like to have field correspondents and people who can jump on the programs kind of at a moment's notice and stuff. And so a lot of the time, if there's something going on in the news, and I know it's something that you've covered on your program or something that you're interested in, I'll have certain people. I'll be like, hey, could you come on for 10 minutes on the program tonight? So yeah, I'd love to be able to add you to the
add me to the list.
Cool, excellent, man. Well, let's stay in touch.
Yeah.
Maybe we can help each other out, okay?
Yeah, we can do that. Hold on, we end this recording.
Before we flip that on-air sign to the off position, a quick reminder. For all things about the report, previews, and reviews, go to italkparanormal.com.
This is Thomas P. Fusco, author of the book Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality, and originator of the theory of supergeometry. And you are listening to the Mallard Report.
Hi, this is Dave Roundtree, author of Paranormal Technology, Understanding the Science of Ghost Hunting, lecturer, author, and paranormal researcher. And when you're not busy in the field, do what I do and listen to the Mallard Report with Jim Mallard.
It's the Mallard Report, yeah, the Mallard Report, the paranormal talk radio show with Jim Mallard as your host. See what lies beneath any paranormal activity. Go inside a world that others don't want to see. It's the Mallard Report, yeah, the Mallard Report.
That's italkparanormal.com. Good night.